So if you look at the impacts of dark data, there are five categories where I would like to bring the focus of this audience. The first is the data usage. When the organizations collect data, generally the data goes through the transformation, the extraction, transformation, and loading pipelines. But some data may be excluded from these pipelines. The data that is excluded from these pipelines run the risk of becoming dark. So the data that is excluded from these pipelines then have the risk of running dark, and that is where we need to bring our focus on. In their articles, Professor Tom Jackson and Ian R. Hodgkinson from the Loughborough University, they had cited that more than half of the data that the organizations collect are for single-use purpose only. In another study, Splunk had noted that the global average of dark data that organizations have is about 60%. The accuracy of the data is as good as the data accuracy of the data itself. Organizations need to determine what is the critical and pertinent data that is useful for their business requirements. For example, if you look at applications like knowledge graphs or large language models, they could work with the mildly curated data. The accuracy is not so important in these cases. But if we look at applications of e-commerce and payment data, that is where the data accuracy and the trustworthiness is crucial. If we look at the OpenAI's ChatGPT, this has been trained with around 300 billion words, which has been basically scraped from the internet based on the data that has been accessible to the system. But this has led to a large amount of misinformation. The ChatGPT output cannot be trusted because the source of the knowledge itself cannot be trusted. The transformed data is trustworthy to an extent to an extent because it is curated based on the lines that we want to use it for the business purposes. If you look at the large language models, they preclude the trustworthiness of the data, and that is in exchange of the data accessibility for the amount of training it requires. Organizations generally have explicit and implicit models of trust based on the governance and privacy models they have in place. The storage of the data can be done by the organizations on premises or on a co-location site or completely over cloud. The cost associated with this stored data is relative to the persistence and accessibility availability of the data. Implications of storage, of the storage array, the infrastructure, power consumption, the material consumption, thermal management, and other considerations need to be taken as an aspect when the cost of the storage of the data has to be associated. If we just take examples of hard disk drives and solid state drives, the power consumption by these two drives have a differing value of 6%. Now, if we scale this 6% value to a large set of data that we have, for example, gigabytes of data that may reside in the large data lakes, this impact is significant for the organizations. Measurement of dark data impact is in its very nascent stage at this moment, but as the organizations are refining their own telemetry and points of measurement, the measurement of dark data itself is rapidly increasing. In 2020, Veritas Technologies had published a study which had projected about 6.4 million tons of carbon dioxide being pumped into the environment because of the presence of dark data. Climate IQ, ClimateIQ.io is another website which provides interesting insights, which highlights the ecological costs due to the presence of dark data infrastructures like data centers. Before we start looking at the transformation and prevention of dark data, it is important to understand the data life cycle itself. While this is not a true data life cycle, since data is always generated, this is a cycle where different phases of the data have been called out. And we'll take a look at how data transformation and prevention activities could occur in these stages. The create phase itself is one where the data is created or modified. This is the phase where the data classification and labeling methods will help the organization to discover the data using different tools. The store phase is when the data is stored. Store and archive are the two stages where we generally find the presence of dark data. Once the data is being processed, it gets into the use phase, and when it is shared with the third-party vendors, it is in the share phase. Now, in this phase, of course, the organizations would have to ensure that they are meeting all the regulatory requirements and legal requirements before the data is shared. The data that is dark, which is stored generally in the store and archive phase, they could be brought back to the use and share phase for the transformation. But the activity of prevention really occurs at all of these phases. Once the data is past its shelf life, it is destroyed or deleted in the destroy phase. The transformation and prevention is like any other optimization business challenge that we have, and we could use the people, process, and technology framework to handle this as well. If we take a look at the people, process, and technology, on the people front, considering the kind of advantage that organizations get with the dark data itself, they need to align the talent management system to a data-centric business model that supports um, that supports the prevention and transformation of dark data. They could do this by having some best practices implemented. They could have these data-centric roles like chief data officer, chief privacy officer, governance or officer in place. They could have trainings aligned to the specific roles like sustainability engineer, data engineers, AI analysts. There needs to be a awareness program generated for curated to the employees, curated for the employees, so that they understand the importance of avoiding any dark data and only retaining it for the required period. Uh, the leaders themselves could have conversations with their staff on the importance of dark data and have all the discussions, business results discussed based on the data itself. The process transformation is basically required because a clear, concise, and a well-defined process can prevent dark data. The controls and the governance that we need to put together in order to ensure that there is no dark data that gets accumulated also needs to consider that we are catering to the local and global standards for regulatory requirements. There can be a joint data governance and sustainability ethics board that can be formed to look at the metrics of the dark data itself. The the technologies that can be used, technology is going to play a key role in terms of transforming the dark data or even gaining insights out of the data itself, which is not dark yet. Um, when the data is created, having the data classification done using the tools rather than doing it via laborious manual efforts is crucial. We could use the metadata labeling tools, and we could also use queries like NoSQL queries on data lakes, large data lakes, to generate the results out of the unstructured data that may reside there. The natural language processing techniques will help us to discover the words and make connections between these words and statements to identify the patterns that are of interest. Since we are looking at data coming from different sources, which may essentially have the same type of data, the same content, but having different metadata or different field names associated with them. It is important to perform data mapping across those different sources so that we can stitch them together and aggregate them in order to get better insights. The dark analytics comprises of looking at the videos, the images, the patterns within that to identify the uh, uh, important metadata that may be relevant for the business organization and perform some analytics based on that. Languages like R and Python provide libraries that can be used for modeling and visualization, and there are open source tools, for example, Apache Spark, that can be used for classification, regression, and clustering of the data. And there are other tools like Jupyter Notebook, which can be used for the visualization itself. This can be then further used for the analysis by the humans. Oriet has already taken you through the different types of dark data that we have focused in this paper. What we would do here is look at how we could process this data to take the corrective actions and transform that data for further insights. So protected data is essentially overprotected or unprotected data, and of course they have the risk of falling into the wrong hands or being completely unusable because of the amount of protection applied to it. In such a case, it is important to make sure that access controls are in place and are given the access is given only on the need basis. There are other technologies like homomorphic or cryptography that can be used in order to make sure that the processes that need to look at the data, read the data, and process it can still do it without the having the access, without anyone having the access to that data. The expired data the expired data is, of course, unusable data, but when the data is created, it is important to assign an expiry date to it. Without an expiry date, the data is either irrelevant or and definitely may lead to inaccurate results, leading to inaccurate decisions and impact to business. So if we look at any data, we need the data controller working in collaboration with the data custodian to ensure that expiry date is assigned to that data. Data expiry can have different values. It could range from 20 years to 20 days, depending upon the kind of data that is. For example, if there's a medical study being conducted over a period of 20 years, the data for all the 20 years need to be maintained and probably further in case someone wants to come back and review the results and explore further whether those results are accurate or not. But if we are looking at data related to a medical examination conducted for, say, cold and cough, that data will not be required for more than 20 days for sure. So, considering it is important that the data controller has a good context of the data requirement. We also look at the regulatory requirements here before any expiry date is assigned. The unlabeled data is essentially a data that cannot be discovered by the tools. We can, of course, have humans go in and look at the data to identify whether it is relevant or not and what is the purpose of that data. But having a laborious manual effort is quite challenging considering the amount of terabytes of petabytes of data we might have in the system. Automated tools like AI-based tools can be employed in these cases. The AI tools also could take a look at the unstructured data to identify the context, the patterns, and assign certain labels based on the matching text matching scheme. The incomplete data, the incomplete data and the incorrect data both may um, both may be introduced because of the incorrect checks or incomplete checks at the collection source itself. or it could be because of the limited data that the source is sending over to the system where the data is being compiled. The incomplete data, uh, for the incomplete data, we would need to understand the different patterns and the specific fields that are missing. These could be regenerated using some AI tools as well, based on the based on the patterns that we have identified. Or we could decide that, for example, if we have if we have a series of data for a particular time, and only for the small 3 minute period there is some data missing, we could have the data uh, generated, predicted based on the prior and the post data. The incorrect data is really related to the the incorrect metadata labeling as well. This can be corrected based on the reference data dictionaries that we have. The field values themselves could be incorrect. For example, if we are looking for a range of values on a particular field, instead of being in that range, if the value is outside, it is obvious that the field value is incorrect. In such cases, we could have the AI tools, AI-based tools, again, looking at the required data, or some manual correction can be made by the humans looking at the reference dictionaries. The improperly represented data is the formatting errors that may occur in the data. For example, the date format may be different when we are looking at data coming from different sources. These can be easily identified by the tools and corrected as well. Bias data is introduced because could be because of the limited test data used for training the models, or it can be because of the incomplete or very limited tests that have been used in the test data itself. These can be corrected by keeping into consideration various ethnicities, geographies, from the background of all the ethnicities and geographies from where the data is being collected, the income brackets, multiple regions, political affiliations. All these can be considered when the test data is being created. Also, when the data is free of all the biases, that is when we will have the accurate results from that. The yet to be discovered data is hidden data, and that cannot be corrected unless we really transform them by applying the right classification and labeling methods there. Once we have the right technologies and tools and the right skill sets employed, we can have the data discovered and used for further analysis. Um, we'll come to the conclusion of the white paper that we presented here. In short, we have talked about the data remediation itself, which includes the replacement, modification, cleansing, and deletion of the useless data. The data remediation itself helps the organizations to reduce their carbon footprint. It also helps the organizations to protect their critical data from falling into the wrong hands by employing the right protection and access control mechanisms. It also helps the organizations to find ways of identifying critical insights which are helpful for the business and unlock its full value. The best practices to eliminate the dark data are to put in place the right talent, the right processes, and the right tools. The dark data prevention and transformation help the organization in achieving the sustainability goals. It also helps the organization realize the benefits across all the organizations by putting together, stitching together the data from different organizations and bringing more value to the employees. And this data, the data can also be used for business results by employing, gaining good insights that can be converted into strategy and business outcome.